afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, and welcome to the White House, and welcome to all of those who are joining us via satellite at more than 3,000 sites around the country and through public broadcasting. I think it's appropriate that we begin this conference on philanthropy by thanking our donors and supporters. So I want to begin by thanking the National Endowment for the Humanities, the federal agency that keeps America learning about our people and our past, and is co-hosting today's conference. I also wish to acknowledge the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation for working with South Carolina Educational Television to bring this conference to audiences across America via satellite and internet. William S. White, the president and CEO of the Mott Foundation, is here with us today, as is Paul Amos, the president and CEO of South Carolina Educational TV. While we are thanking those who have helped extend our reach beyond the walls of the White House, I also wish to mention at least a few of the many organizations that have done such great work, not only to make this broadcast available, but also to host local forums and viewings. I particularly want to recognize Dr. Bernadine Healy, the president of the American Red Cross, and Betty Bean, the president of United Way of America, who are here with us today and who have partnered to sponsor many local events across the country. We know there are many other groups that have also been participating and helping. The Forum of Regional Associations of Grant Makers, the National Committee on Planned Giving, and the National Association of Fundraising Executives, to name just a few, who have worked hard to build a national audience for today's discussion. I also want to thank the J. Paul Getty Trust, the Community Foundation Silicon Valley, whose president, Peter Hero, will be joining us later this afternoon, Jill Iskell and the Iskell Family Foundation, and Marcy Polier and the Marcy Polier Family Foundation for their help. And I also want finally to recognize Secretary Donna Shalala, who is head of our combined federal campaign this year, and Janet LaChance, the head of the Office of Personnel Management, and my friend, Paul Newman, famous for many things, including his generosity. Now, the heroes we have just seen and admired in the video are with us in the East Room today. And I would like to ask all of you who were featured in the video that are here today to please stand so we can recognize and thank you. You know, these are some of the heroes of philanthropy in America today, and they can be found, and others, millions others like them, in every single community in our nation. Wherever an American sees a need and acts to fill it, whenever a child sees another child without books or food at school and offers to share her own, wherever a business person takes stock of all the blessings in his or her life and bequeaths them to those with none. You know, often the simplest acts of generosity are the most heroic. I think of the inspiring story of Osceola McCarty, who spent a lifetime washing, starching, and ironing other people's clothes, living simply and frugally in Mississippi. 4 years ago, she decided to use her life savings of $150,000 to endow a scholarship fund at a nearby university. "I'm giving it away so that the children won't have to work so hard like I did," she said. Last month, at the age of 91, Ms. McCarty passed away, but her gifts live on in the scores of students who will go to college because of her generosity. They probably weren't even thinking about it when they made their contributions, but Esperanza Rich and Mattel Dawson and Roland Lowe, all the American heroes we celebrate today, have also made invaluable contributions to the strength of our democracy. I've been privileged to represent our country in many of the world's newest democracies, places where people are just beginning to understand the responsibilities and benefits of freedom. And everywhere I go, people ask me, how has the United States been able to make its democracy work for so many years? So I tell them about our traditions of citizen service and philanthropy, about how our democracy thrives not just because of our free elections and our free markets, but because in that space between government and the economy, our citizens come together to help each other, to lend a hand in times of trouble, to support nonprofit organizations, and to look how all of us can make a contribution to doing more. Our democracy thrives because of Marion Bodner, a Kentucky homemaker who raised $250,000 in relief supplies to help her native Nicaragua recover from Hurricane Mitch. We thrive because of the Reverend Ann Pearson, who gave each of her parishioners $10 out of a small inheritance to donate to a worthy cause so that they could recognize all the creative ways each of us can find to help others. And literally there are millions and millions of stories we could tell this afternoon to really in some way represent the 85% of all funds given to charity in America that come from individuals. The President and I have invited you here today to find out how we can magnify and spur the philanthropic spirit of all of our citizens in the new millennium. And though philanthropy comes in many forms, we'd like to focus today's discussions on individual giving. Many of you know that we have created a Millennium Council here at the White House to celebrate this moment in time and to lead a national effort to honor the past and imagine the future. And one important part of the Council's mission is to help all Americans identify the gifts each of us can give to the future. There's no better gift our generation can give to the future than a strengthened philanthropic tradition. There has never been a better time for philanthropy than today. We are living at a time of unprecedented prosperity. The new economy has brought new wealth to so many Americans, and my generation and the president's, the so-called baby boomers, stand to inherit $12 trillion in the coming years. Just imagine what revolutionary progress we could bring to America, how many lives we could change if every American family increased their giving by just 1% of their income. We could offer child care to more than 6 million children. We could deliver 250 million more meals to the homebound elderly. We could guarantee Head Start to every low-income preschooler in America. We could provide shelter to 4 million people. We could save all the rare books in our libraries and still have more than enough money left over to create the equivalent of the Ford Foundation each year. But we cannot assume that any of this will come to pass, because philanthropy must be taught. So today, let us find innovative ways to cultivate the innately generous spirit of our young people. New communities of donors must be asked to participate. We have to find ways to embrace and encourage philanthropists of all races, ethnicities, and colors. New avenues of giving must be opened and explored, so we have to utilize the rich possibilities of cyberspace and the information age. These are just some of the opportunities and challenges that I hope we can discuss this afternoon. And I am very pleased now to introduce someone who 7 years ago called us to find new ways of extending opportunity to all Americans and requesting responsibility from all Americans so that we could create a community of all Americans. And we could not do that were it not for philanthropy, and we could not do that without leadership of the kind the President has given us. So it's a great personal pleasure for me to introduce the President of the United States.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you and good afternoon. I am delighted to welcome all of you here. I thank all those who are here from our government and all of you who have come from all over our country and all walks of life to this very, very important meeting. I also want to say a special word of thanks to Hillary for yet another wonderful idea. This was a good idea to have this conference. And all of you who have helped on any of these Millennium projects, I think it's done us a lot of good to take time out and think about the really big issues in our society and how we want them to play out in the years ahead. And particularly, I think this is an important issue at an important moment. A long time ago, Alexis de Tocqueville said that charity in America was something more than simple compassion. It was a sign of good citizenship. He wrote, "Americans make great and real sacrifices to the public welfare. They hardly ever fail to lend faithful support to one another." Today, this is a strong tradition, and the face of this tradition is changing. Philanthropy is, like our country, now more diverse as new groups seize and share opportunity in the new economy. It is more democratic as Americans of all income levels, believe it or not, give at roughly equal levels. It is younger as the high-tech economy creates a new generation of philanthropists. I got to take a little time out. Last night I had dinner with a lot of these high-tech gurus who made allowances for the fact that I am obviously technologically challenged. And we were talking about, you know, how we're all going to relate to each other and maximize the potential of the information age. And I started talking about this conference today, and I said, we've got to get more people to give. I said, I would like it if internet usage were as dense in America as telephone usage. If we had 98% penetration, everybody had an email address, I think we could have a dramatic impact on education and on poverty. I think we could skip a whole generation of development. And how are we going to get this done? And so there's this guy standing there, he's 27 years old, you know, and he says, he said, you know, when I got out of college, I started this company, and 3 years later, I sold it for $150 million, and I started 3 others. And he said, what you need is founder stock. He said, we need to go all over America and gather up founder stock and put it in a big trust to make universal the access to the internet. He said, because you got all these guys like me that don't know we're rich yet. We're still living on $30,000, but we got all this stock. So he said, that's what you need. So I'm now giving you my contribution to this conference, which I learned at the foot of a 28-year-old last night. So, I mean, that's encouraging to people like me who aren't young, you know? We don't have to depend on the Rockefellers and the Mellons and the Carnegies or even the Paul Newmans. We can go get founder stock. I also think it's important to point out that not only the ways of giving are changing, but the people. I mean, when I saw that film, I was so proud that there was a federal employee that had given every single month for 25 years. Someone obviously of modest means, doubtless a lot of other claims on her income. So I want to thank people like Mary Grayson and others who are giving, and I think we ought to think about new opportunities, or I think the buzzword is portals, that are opening in the world of online philanthropy, and how we can make sure that we can continue not only to increase the volume of money, but to broaden the base of giving. We'll hear today about venture philanthropists and startup charities and other ways in which the entrepreneurial spirit is invading and energizing this field. I would like to also point out that volunteering is another important way of giving. This week, Hillary and I celebrated the 5th anniversary of AmeriCorps, and we've already had 150,000 young people serve. And I'm very, very proud of that. I think that is an important thing to say. In a lot of ways, the measure of our life and our happiness is to paraphrase one of the many wonderful things Martin Luther King said, can be answered by the question, what are you doing for others? So I'm encouraged by this conference, by the energy here. Some of my favorite people in all our country are out here in this audience today, people I have admired, some of you for 20 or 30 years, for all the things that I have watched you do for others. And I thank you for coming. I am glad that the sheer volume of charitable giving is going off the charts. But I think as we've had this phenomenal increase in wealth in our country, I would feel even better if the percentage of our national income devoted to charitable giving had gone up just a little bit. You heard Hillary say what we could do if we could just increase it by 1%. But going from 2 to 3% is a huge increase. We've been sort of stuck at 2%. Now, when the stock market triples, 2% is a lot more than it used to be. That's not real pocket change, it's real money. But if you think about what we could do with just a little more, I think it is really worth pondering. We're having the same debate in Congress now, and I don't want to get into any kind of a political dispute about that, but let me just give you an example. I very much want the United States to take the lead with the rest of the wealthy countries in alleviating the debt of the poorest countries in the world. And the Pope has asked us to do it for the millennium. And I figure, now this is a campaign with the broad base, it being spearheaded by the Pope and Bono, the lead singer for U2, you know. And even though I'm not a candidate for anything anymore, I can spot a big tent when I see it. And so, you know, we ought to do this. And it's just a little bit of all the money we've got. And it's just like de Tocqueville said a long time ago, this is not just charity, this is good citizenship. We take this burden off these people. If they're well governed and they're working hard, we give them a chance to be our partners and friends in a more equal and balanced way for the future. So there are things for all of us to do. I would hope today that I will learn something and that we will learn something about how we can at least incrementally increase the percentage of our income we are devoting to philanthropy. I hope we will learn something, as I've already said, about the ways we can do it. And I hope we will learn a little bit about whether we can all give smarter and whether we can make sure that the money we are giving is spent in the most effective possible way. I take it we all began by accepting that we no longer believe that there is a choice out there, which was never a real choice, between government meeting all of our society's needs and government walking away from them all and letting philanthropy do it. We have to have a better partnership, and it will work better if we do. We need to think about in government whether we can do more things to generate more constructive philanthropy. The Treasury Department will meet with representatives of the nonprofit sector next month to discuss this. And I, in the meanwhile, am going to establish an interagency task force to strengthen our philanthropic partnership between government, nonprofit groups, and citizens, and to ask the Council of Economic Advisors to do me a study on the role of philanthropy in the American economy and how they believe I can increase it. By analyzing trends in charitable giving, by assessing the impact of the baby boomers' retirement, which it's going to be interesting to see whether it makes us more or less generous when we retire, this largest of all generations of Americans. And it should make us more generous because the kids in school are finally the first generation bigger than the baby boomers, and they need our help. But we need to think about that. What's our message going to be to the baby boomers as they move toward retirement? What's our message going to be to people thinking about the shape of our social tensions as we double the number of people over 65 in the next 30 years? What's our message going to be to ourselves, those of us in the baby boom generation, about how our citizenship responsibilities should grow when we lay down the burdens of retirement, particularly if we've been lucky enough to have a secure way to maintain our standard of living? This is deserving of an awful lot of thought, because there's a whole bunch of us, and on the whole, those who manage to escape a career in politics are going to be better off than any generation in American history. So some serious thought needs to be given to this. Well, I've had a little fun with this today. But I'm really grateful to you all for being here. This is a big deal. We all know, look at that, the truth is we're all fairly pleased with ourselves for being here. Because you feel better about your life when you spend a portion of it doing something for somebody else. And you feel better about the good fortune you have financially if you spend at least a little of it giving something to someone else. So what we want to do is to start the new millennium poised to do more and to do it better and to give more chances to more people to participate. Thank you all very much.
Well, the President is absolutely right about the interest in this conference. I don't know that we've ever done anything at the White House that has provoked more excitement or inquiries or requests to be included. And everyone who is not in this room, let me assure you we are packed to the gills and delighted that you can be joining us through satellite and internet. This afternoon we're going to hear from two panels of speakers as well as members of the audience. Our first panel will focus on two important issues: expanding America's diverse philanthropic traditions and teaching the tradition of giving to a new generation of youth. The second will focus on innovations in the areas of venture philanthropy and technology. So let me introduce the first panel. Emmett Carson is president of the Minneapolis Foundation and a scholar of philanthropy in the African American community. Peter Hart, the founder of Peter D. Hart Research Associates, has done extensive public opinion surveys and focus groups on the subject of community involvement, in addition to his extensive work for such clients as NBC News, the Wall Street Journal, and the Smithsonian Institution. Justin Timberlake performs with the musical group NSYNC. At the age of 18, he has created his own charitable foundation to help schools create high-caliber music programs. And finally, Dorothy Johnson, the president of the Council of Michigan Foundations, is a nationally recognized expert on youth giving, in addition to leading the largest regional association of grant makers in the nation. So let's begin, and we'll start with Dr. Carson.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. There's an old saying in the African American community that it's not the things you don't know that get you into trouble, but the things you know for sure that are not so. Our popular public perceptions about who are philanthropists, what they are interested in, and how they will structure their giving have been narrow and one-dimensional. The old view has it that philanthropists are wealthy, usually male, often of European heritage, and they practice a top-down, noblesse oblige, rich to poor kind of giving. It also argues that people of color have had no giving traditions and they need to be educated. Now, these false beliefs have permeated both the larger culture as well as communities of colors. We must discard these antiquated views to take full advantage of the changing landscape of philanthropy. Now, what's the reality? The reality is that every racial and ethnic group has had a strong history of philanthropy and giving. The first and probably most celebrated act of philanthropy is Thanksgiving, where a group of Native Americans, who some might say did not act in their long-term best interest, ensured the survival ensured the survival of their own settlers.
That's a great line.
I like it.
The current Philanthropy Day would be well suited to be moved to Thanksgiving as a day of celebration of philanthropy, because it would both indicate the giving tradition does not require you to be rich, does not require that you give down, and requires that people of color do have. It acknowledges that people of color do have these giving traditions. One of the reasons why they have these giving traditions is because all of the major religious faiths have had a high premium on the value of giving and volunteering. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and Buddhism. Organized religion has been an important transmitter for the teaching of philanthropy. It is not unusual for churches or other places of worship, especially in the African American community, to be a conduit for philanthropy. All racial and ethnic groups have relied on their self-help giving traditions to ensure their socioeconomic survival during times when their rights were not assured in this country. People of color, women, and their supporters have paid the price in dollars, time, and their lives in challenging America to live up to its highest ideals. The civil rights movement and the women's rights movement are two examples of that. Mr. President, the philanthropy will be different in the new millennium. The new philanthropists will be younger, and the philanthropy of people of color will be more visible. The strong U.S. economy and the wealth generated by the technological industry, the sports and entertainment community are enabling people to reach economic security at far younger ages. The changing demographics of American society, along with equal opportunity, ensures that people of color will have the means to act on their charitable impulses. Now, what does this mean for the future? We need to create a new community expectation of citizenship that envisions giving and volunteering as something every American participates in from the cradle into perpetuity. Philanthropy should be a lifetime endeavor rather than legacies that start after one is dead or near dead. The combined knowledge and resources of the old and new philanthropists, if coordinated and channeled, can create a lasting renaissance in the quality of life, not only for the American people, but also the larger global village. Nonprofit organizations that have diverse board governance, staffing, and program outreach will be well positioned to earn the trust and support of the new philanthropists. Those that do not will not survive. Organizations of philanthropists, such as the Council on Foundations, regional associations of grant makers, and research centers on philanthropy, will need to carefully think through how their definitions of membership may need to change and what opportunities for information sharing they may need to provide, and training. Finally, and it should come as no surprise to any of you, I believe that community foundations, because of our work with individual donors and broad interest in strengthening their local communities, are especially well positioned to play a leadership role in addressing these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Dr. Carson, and thank you for reminding us that many of the traditions of giving in our country are not captured through statistics or IRS collections. When families give to other families in need without expecting a tax deduction or going through an intermediary organization, they are philanthropists. And certainly volunteer time is hard to capture as well, but it is a major way that many, many Americans give to their communities. So it is important for us to remember that in the new millennium, philanthropy will be even more significant in many communities that have not traditionally been seen as part of the philanthropic community. Now, I know that there are many people in this audience who have a lot of experience in this area, and before we move on to the next panelist, I'd like to hear from several of them who have perspectives on America's diverse giving traditions. Lorraine Cortez Vasquez is the president of the Hispanic Federation of New York and the incoming president of Hispanics in Philanthropy. Evan Mendelson is the executive director of the Jewish Funders Network. We will hear from Evan about the role of religious organizations in teaching the giving tradition. And then I'd like to ask Peg Talbert, Executive Director of the Michigan Women's Foundation, to speak about women's funds. So if we could, I would like to start with Ms. Cortez Vasquez.
Mr. President and Mrs. Clinton, on behalf of the Hispanic Federation and Latino not-for-profits, I thank you for hosting this session. Latinos have also had a long-standing tradition of giving. We give to our church, to our family, and neighbors in need. In fact, we have a very strong and large informal network of giving. We send back money to our homes of origin to support relatives. We take in incoming cousins and friends, take them into our homes to make them until they get on their feet in this country. And aunts and uncles help support tuition of a family member. Those are the examples of Latino philanthropy that occur every day in our community and will never be captured in any published formal study on giving. Therefore, our level of giving appears to be much lower than it really is. The Hispanic Federation's 1999 Latinos in Giving survey indicates that 2/3 of all Latinos contributed to an institution or a charitable cause. When asked why they give, they cited that they wanted to promote self-sufficiency. They wanted to rely less on government. They also recognize and value the work that not-for-profits do in our community. While half of Latinos give to church, we find that income and education, as it increases, giving to not-for-profit also increases. This assures that there is room for philanthropy among Latinos. One day we will hope to have our own Bill Gates, or as my friend Lee says, our own Guillermo Huerta. But until then, we are comforted by the fact that 19% of Latinos contribute $200 or more to the charity of their choice. Yet organized philanthropy has not given us our fair share. We are working hard to raise dollars from our people. The 6 Latino funds in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Kansas City, St. Paul, Lorain, Ohio, and of course the Hispanic Federation in New York have formed the Latinos Fund Collaborative. Our goal is to increase credibility, to enhance Latino philanthropy at a national level, and to raise public awareness, and to promote giving within our own community. We will be forever grateful to the Kellogg Foundation for bringing us together, and hope that their involvement with us in the future will ensure the growth of Latino giving in this country. Our growth potential is tremendous. In New York City alone, 40% of the people stated they had not given because they had not been asked. And ask we will. As we become the largest minority group in the country, with the work of the Latino funds and philanthropic institutions that believe in us, that will invest in us, you can rest assured that future generations of Latino will continue to carry the tradition of giving that is so honored in this country. I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll hear from Evan Mendelsohn.
Thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to be here. And as several of you have already said this morning, philanthropic behavior didn't develop in a vacuum, but rather comes from very strong religious traditions and roots. Concepts such as stewardship and tzedakah are basic values in communities of faith. The U.S. Catholic bishops describe stewardship as receiving God's gifts gratefully, cultivating them responsibly, sharing them lovingly in justice with others, and returning them with increase to the land. In Jewish tradition, tzedakah is the responsibility to do justice through your giving and your voluntary efforts. These traditions are handed down through religious teachings and family traditions and modeled in the various faith communities. The American Jewish community has been carrying on that tradition, giving to federated communal funds and through foundations for over 100 years. Every Jew, no matter their economic situation, is expected and asked to be responsible for others beyond themselves and their families. Religious holidays and life cycle events are especially important times to participate in the mitzvah translated as religious obligation, of tzedakah. At age 13, young Jewish men and women celebrate their bar and bat mitzvah, a ritual of joining the adult community with full responsibilities as Jews. There are several exciting programs in the Jewish community that teach the bar or bat mitzvah about philanthropy. In San Francisco, a youth foundation called the Seventh Grade Fund was established at Brandeis Hillel Jewish Day School to teach these young people about grant making, Jewish traditions, and community needs. Last year, they allocated $13,000 to projects in San Francisco, as close to their home, and Kosovo, very far away. A philanthropist in Springfield, Massachusetts, has started a program to promote youth philanthropy all over the country called B'nai Tzedek. And nationally, any young Jew can establish a youth endowment fund at the Jewish Fund for Justice, and then choose the youth organization he or she wishes to support. It is through models such as these that we hope to continue to transmit the religious values and traditions of our people to the next generation. Thank you very much.
And now Peg Talbert will talk about women in philanthropy.
Thank you very much. It's a real honor to describe to you not just a set of organizations, but a movement. Women's funds began more than 100 years ago with the founding of AAUW's Educational Foundation. The modern era began with the creation of the Ms. Foundation in 1972. By the early 80s, there were 13 women's funds, but today there are more than 100 in the United States and a dozen or more globally. All of these foundations share the similar values of change, not charity, of money insured to get to programs which serve women and girls specifically, the valuing of the significance of gender, and a desire to engage new donors who share these values. The results have been tremendous. The Women's Funding Network has tracked just 50 of these funds over the last 5 years, and already assets have grown by 200%, and grant making has nearly doubled. Now let's think a little bit about the future. I'd like to share 2 programs the Michigan Women's Foundation has created to work specifically with girls. One of them is called Young Women for Change. We have 2 sites in the state of Michigan. Together they grant more than $40,000 to programs which they select to serve the needs of girls. They are trained in philanthropy and leadership. They understand and research the needs of their communities, and they make some bold decisions, including the funding of a nonprofit that's suing for Title IX because of discrimination against girls in sports. They've taken teen prostitutes off the streets at a time when a community did not want to admit this problem. And they've also really put their money into bold action. We also, as I think about it, am very excited because not only are dollars getting to programs today, but many of these young women now want careers in philanthropy and have reshaped their educational goals. I expect if this conference were held 10 years from now, I would look around and see many of their faces here. Now, a second program that we're just launching with the support of the Kellogg Foundation is a Girls in Giving patch. We've worked with all 14 state Girl Scout councils in Michigan to create this collaborative program which will offer training in philanthropy to every level of Girl Scout from Daisy to senior cadet. That means that within the next couple of years, 130,000 young women in the state of Michigan and 13,000 of their Girl Scout leaders will have experienced this particular program. There are many other ways that women's funds are on the verge of the new millennium. They're creating donor circles. They're working in new workplace campaigns. We're establishing new kinds of relationships with women's service and professional organizations to engage them in the act of philanthropy. Whether it's Alaska or Maine or California or Tucson or Chicago or Atlanta or whatever, women's funds are a force. And what truly excites me about the next millennium is not just the new dollars that are going to come to the table, but the commitment to change and the values and new philosophy that women will bring. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like now to turn to Peter Hart, who has done extensive research on the attitudes of both the baby boom generation and today's youth on community and responsibility. And Peter, we'd like to hear your thoughts on those.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Clinton. The rules of the game are changing in every area, but nowhere is it sort of more evident than in the area of philanthropy. What I would tell you is if we had a Dow Jones average to measure the commitment of young people, the commitment of people's involvement, and the engagement in civic affairs, we would be in a bull market. Indeed, looking ahead, I can tell you that the polls that we have been doing and the work that we have been doing is exciting, challenging, and suggests that there are a lot of good things happening out there. There are 5 findings I'd like to sort of relate to you. First of all, from the Generation X. When I look at the Generation Xers, here's what we know. They're the most misunderstood generation that there is. Its members really don't fit into the old models. They have as much idealism and involvement as their older brothers and sisters, or indeed as their parents. But their idealism is very different. It's not about changing the world, it's about changing their neighborhood. In our survey for Public Allies, 54% of Gen Xers said a very effective way to make changes in our country was volunteering to help with individuals directly. Only 18% felt similarly about political campaigns or social causes. Generation Xers should give us a great deal of hope, Emmett, about the issues of diversity, respect, and tolerance, because they place a premium on diversity and reaching out to people of different races and different backgrounds. When asked about the values that they care most about, appreciating and respecting racial and ethnic diversity of our country, 80% of them said it's important. Indeed, it's every bit as important as the other values that we know, such as self-reliance, patriotism, and religion. For now, it's important, as the President just said, to recognize that they are more into giving time than necessarily giving money. Indeed, 85% of these Gen Xers tell us their motivation is to feel that they are making a difference and indeed helping those in need. Asking for their time, providing them the opportunities, and seeing that the benefits of their participation is what's going to be able to create them into strong volunteers, not only for today, but for tomorrow. The story of the baby boom generation is more challenging, but just as encouraging. They have less confidence in government and accord politics a less central role in their lives. Baby boomers do not blindly trust groups in terms of where they give their money, but once you win them over, you have them forever. Indeed, they look to charitable and social causes to be able to promote changes. They view their contributions as investments and demand, indeed, accountability. But what is most interesting and what is most important about the baby boom generation, it's about to become the backbone for our society, both in terms of volunteerism and in terms of philanthropy for the decade ahead. Among baby boomers in our survey, we found 59% of them said, I plan to give more over the next 5 years. And if you ask about people over the age of 60, only 18% of them say they plan to give more. But they're also going to be more involved in terms of our communities, because these people plan to leave their careers earlier. And because of that, they look at volunteerism as a central part of their lives. Indeed, a third said, it's going to be a very important part of my life. And they do not want to be asked to do busy work, but they're looking for opportunities that can engage their skills and their abilities. So as I look at all of this, Mrs. Clinton, what emerges really is tear up the old playbook. Those rules are gone. To be successful, what you have to do is you have to go out and ask people to get involved. You have to tailor your message to your new audiences. To be successful, you have to find a way that people can feel a direct effect of participation. And to be successful, you have to use the employers, because these people are ready to get involved through their place of work if they are asked. It was Thomas Wolfe who, I think 70 years ago, was talking about a different thing when he said, you can't go home again. You can't go home to the old forms and systems, to the things that once seemed everlasting, but are changing all the time. The home to every one of us is in the future. There is no other way. And indeed, that's true for philanthropy also. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Well, Justin, I would be very interested in having you perhaps talk a bit about what motivated you to want to give back, and what do you anticipate your foundation doing?
Well, thank you very much. Before I begin, I got to be honest. This isn't your normal pop group's demographic. But nevertheless, I don't always get to dress up to go to work, so I'm a bit excited to be here to talk about what I've just started a couple of weeks ago, and it is the Justin Timberlake Foundation. I remember one of my close friends, he asked me one time, he said, if you could use one word to describe your life, what would it be? And I thought about it, and I said, I would use the word blessed. And let me tell you what I mean. I've been really lucky in my life. I've landed what started as a hobby, and it became a career for me. And with that in mind, I think back to when I used to attend a public school before I really started pursuing my career with NSYNC and where that's leading me. And I was in this very small town outside of Memphis, Tennessee, in a public school about the age of 10 or 11, and had so many dreams and so many aspirations of the arts and music and entertainment. And there was never, ever really any way for me to outlet that, to find a way to pursue that. And I thought about it for a while and talked over this with my parents, and I remember my parents always saying, remember your roots. If whatever happens, remember your roots, remember where you came from. And that's what I'm doing now. I want to give back to the communities. I want to install the best possible music and arts programs in schools, in public schools today. You notice that, thanks. You notice that if it's not an arts school, so to speak, you don't really find it many arts programs. Mm-hmm. And I feel that music in my life I've used it to channel so many emotions and so many positive and negative energies that I may have been feeling at the time. I feel that if you give young minds and young hearts those possibilities, that they can really do something positive with it instead of all these negative situations that we've so recently seen in the past year or two with public schools and public high schools. So I've just started this so recently, 2 weeks ago, and in the next, couple of months, I'm going to be working with the Giving Back Fund, who's helping me start this foundation. And you'll be hearing in ways that you can definitely help me give back to the kids and help them, because I really think music has been a way of my life, and I think it should be a way of life. It's such a great form of expression. And, and that's it. I just want to give back. Thank you.
I should mention that Justin is here in part because tomorrow, you may have seen this enormous tent we have on the back south lawn of the White House. We're having a big concert sponsored by VH1 and some other supporters to bring to broader public awareness the lack of music education and opportunities in our schools. And so this is a very direct connection between what Justin believes and what his foundation will do and why he's here, and and the contributions that he's going to make, and I'm very grateful to him. Now we turn to Dorothy Johnson, who has done a lot of work and a lot of thinking about young people and giving, and I would very much appreciate your telling us how you involve youth in giving and what kind of youth service programs really work.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Clinton, and you might say that we are in business to create more Justin Timberlakes, ideally. Justin?
Well, thank you.
The Council of Michigan Foundations is one of 29 regional associations serving more than 3,300 grant makers throughout the United States. And a number of these RAGs, as we call them, have new ventures in philanthropy, just as are being discussed here today by many of you. Our council has two such initiatives that focus on youth, to engage youth in citizen action intended for the common good. In giving, with the support of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, our Michigan Community Foundation's Youth Project has established endowed youth funds to serve every citizen of the state of Michigan. We've had more than 5,000 youth involved. You might say we're growing our own. But each year, more than 1,500 high school youth are involved with what we call youth advisory committees. They have to raise the money and they grant the money. Today, in 86 Michigan communities, grants are being made by these young people that range from a few $100s to more than $70,000 annually. There's nothing like watching a young person make a $70,000 grant for an issue that they care about. Our experience with these young people over the last 11 years has taught us that youth are responsible, they're creative, and they're thoughtful. Yes, members of the Youth Advisory Committees, or YACs as we call them, are National Honor Students, but they're also teen moms and adjudicated youth. And they have learned that working together, they understand the problems of their peers and are creatively working to do something about it. They haven't been shy about the kinds of grants they have made: Planned Parenthood, AIDS education, mentoring problems and programs. Our evaluator is tracking this first group of philanthropists or yackers that are graduating from college. They're making career-changing decisions about what they want to pursue. They are proving that with training and a shared goal, youth can accomplish a lot with limited resources. We are very excited to hear today about other youth programs around the country. They are growing, and I believe will continue to grow. This is indeed a generation with much to give. They just need the chance. Now, in serving, we're pleased to say that through a K-12 education and philanthropy project with support from a group of funders, our council is now involved in developing a new curriculum to teach philanthropy in schools. Not all of us were blessed with that ethic in our childhood, and we believe, many of us believe, that it is teachable. Currently, over 70 classroom teachers are working to build the initial curriculum. The lessons are part of the normal course of study, fulfilling core, underscores core, educational goals. These lessons, in essence, teach how to have a civil society. Available on the web, we now have more than 100 of these lessons for teachers and plan to have more. We are, in fact, having great interest internationally. But here are some examples. An elementary school teacher, when she's teaching suffixes, talks about selfish and self-lust as examples to introduce the language of philanthropy. A fourth grade teacher discusses the Underground Railroad and talks about how this was done by volunteers and how individuals worked in the independent sector to confront injustice. The curriculum is comprehensive. While the private nonprofit sector can help, long-term dissemination requires engaging the public education system. In addition, we're partners with the Indiana-based Habits of the Heart effort to use this curriculum with out-of-school programs and religious organizations, and we're excited about the synergies of what that will create. It's also important to note that through the leadership of the Corporation for National Service, progress is being made to institutionalize learning and service as a standard teaching method. Thank you, Mr. President. The motto of our collaborative in our state is every child, every year. Every student will have a special service learning experience. We are learning with the help of our youth in Michigan that to learn to give, you must have the experience of giving. To learn to serve, you need to be of service. And that to learn the meaning of citizen action for the common good, you need to be exposed in classrooms and beyond to the history and powerful impact of philanthropy. One study after another has shown that adults give more if they give of their time. Just think, if we have a pool of committed citizens nurtured in elementary school, trained in middle and high schools, what a force to deal with the individual problems in our communities. Young people demonstrate to us daily that the philanthropic tradition is safe in their hands. Yes, Justin, it is safe. We just need to be intentional in our efforts to help to give them the opportunity. Thank you.
Dorothy, I understand that you have with you one of the young people who's participated in this program, and would you introduce her and ask her to stand and perhaps briefly say what it's meant to her?
Indeed, Chayo Long Mendez, who is a yacker from Battle Creek, Michigan. Chayo.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I am so excited to be with all of you today. It's a wonderful opportunity to share my experience. I am a member of the Battle Creek Community Foundation Youth Alliance Committee, better known as the YAC, which is a group of high school students that meets monthly during the school year to improve the quality of life for area youth. We accomplish this goal through needs assessments and asset mapping on youth issues, community service, proactive projects, scholarships, and 2 grant-making cycles per year. An example of a really exciting grant that we made was to a support center for homeless teens that required them to be employed and work toward their GED. A young woman involved in the local GED program designed it. The residents of the home will be provided with a structured living environment that will include discipline and support services. The home that was donated for this project had been pretty neglected, so our grant of $10,000 is being used in collaboration with Junior Achievement and Habitat for Humanity to prepare it for its first residents. The project was one of 5 grants that we awarded last grant cycle, totaling $24,200. That was 1 grant cycle out of 2 in 1 year. Being a member of the YAC has given me the opportunity to become an active member of the community through grant making. It has also allowed me to come into contact with dynamic youth who are determined to make a positive impact on their community. It seems to me that my fellow YACers have become more responsible contributing members of our community as a result of their service. Being on the YAC also causes us to want to change the image that adults have of teens. Because our YAC is giving the income generated by a permanent endowment, the YAC will be around forever. New youth grant makers are always getting involved. If a nonprofit organization is going to develop a new program for youth, the leadership now knows that it should visit the YAC and get us involved up front. We are aware of youth grant makers in more than 20 states and 5 countries. In Michigan alone, there are over 70 YACs. This past summer, we have had youth grant makers from 5 states and British Columbia participate in the Council of Michigan Foundation's Youth Leadership Program. This program was a wonderful way to broaden our knowledge of grant making. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity to share my experience in philanthropy.
Thank you, Carol. You know, earlier today we had a roundtable on youth voices on giving, sponsored by the Corporation for National Service. And I think that Malik Evans is here. And Malik, where are you, Malik? Yes, if you could just in a very short time, just tell us briefly what you came to conclude about the roundtable.
Yes, basically, I did have the honor of attending the Corporation for National Services roundtable. And the young people there who represented a diverse group of young people from across the country came up with 3 areas that they thought that people who deal with philanthropy should look at: national policy, media and awareness, and education. Under national policy, the young people concluded that there should be a cabinet-level position established called maybe a youth minister. Many countries have a cabinet position where the minister focuses exclusively on young people, and we need this also in the United States because we understand that young people truly are the future leaders of tomorrow. Also, under national policy, there's a Senate Committee on Youth Violence, and we feel as though it is necessary to take a proactive approach. So there should be a Senate Committee on Youth Service to see and assess how young people can get involved in service as they move forward into the new millennium. Also, our second category, which was media and awareness, we hear so often of the Columbines or the Paducahs of young people getting involved in negative behavior, but we want to see a youth media association where young people highlight and really come to conclusions and broadcast what they are doing in areas around philanthropy to stimulate other young people to get involved. Also, we want to see money that is allocated to foundations that foundations give out handled by youth. So that means money from youth going to youth to impact the projects in which they are involved in. And lastly, a big one was education. We have to understand that school is important, and we have to integrate education with service, because philanthropy, truly, one of the biggest forms of philanthropy is service. So from kindergarten on up, service has got to be a major part of the curriculum in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You know, we have many other organizations who are here that are working to engage young people in service and in giving, and I want to acknowledge the Girl Scouts, an organization that has long been committed to teaching the ethic of service and which is unveiling a new philanthropy patch. And I want to commend the Girl Scouts for taking this important step and thank Joyce Richards, the National Director for Advancement of the Girl Scouts, who's here with us today. I'm also pleased that a group of organizations, including United Way, City Year, 4-H, Save the Children, the U.S. Committee for UNICEF, and the Corporation for National Service, have come together to plan a new initiative on youth philanthropy. The Gates Foundation, which has in a very short time made such a significant contribution to so many important causes, is committed to supporting the next stage of the group's planning process. And I'd like to ask Patty Stonecipher, the co-chair of the Gates Foundation, to say a few words about the importance of this initiative.
Thank you, Mrs. Clinton. And President Clinton, we agree with you completely when you say this was a very good idea. The past hour has been both informational and inspirational, and so we are very pleased to take up your challenge to support the many youth initiatives and the proposals that have been put forth today, as well as organizations and foundations already working to spread the good works of youth. Many exceptional things have happened to Bill and Melinda Gates in their life, and they believe that gives them exceptional responsibility. But one thing that they shared with essentially everyone in this room is that they came from communities and families that really believe that community service and philanthropy was a responsibility for every one of us, and they are very excited to be able to support another conference of this sort that actually takes the momentum expressed here today, whether it is in Michigan or Tennessee or around the country, to really accelerate the enormous commitment of our youth to continuing and extending the impact of their service and philanthropy. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to thank these panelists, and as they rejoin the audience, I'm going to ask the other panelists to come forward, Kevin Fong and Catherine Mother and Steve Case. And while we're changing the panelists, I'm going to ask the President to reflect on this first panel.
I'd just like to say a couple of things. First of all, I want to personally say, I know I speak for all Americans, I was very grateful by the extraordinarily large and generous gift that the Gates Foundation has given to the education of minority children for the future. I think it will empower a lot of people and change their future. The thing I liked about the last panel was that we talked a lot about how young people have something to give and ought to be in charge of how it's given away. And I like that because I believe if we could, and there was some talk here about the service. Maryland is now the only state in the country that requires some form of citizen service in the school curriculum as a condition of graduation from high school. 12 years ago, the then governor, Republican governor of New Jersey, Tom Kean, and I were on a commission to study the middle school experience, and we recommended that every state impose or just add it to the curriculum. And I didn't see it as a burden. I thought it was a gift. But I think that what I got out of all of you is that we have to try to start this habit in a systematic way early. The other thing is the recommendation that there ought to be some youth department or something. You might be interested to know Boston and a number of other cities actually have city councils that are youth councils. Some cities actually have youth mayors that do parallel jobs. But the city council actually, in Boston, the youth council, actually has regular, systematic input into policy affecting the young people of the country. And I just had one of my roundtables here last week with a lot of young people who recommended that I ought to do something like that and try to get it kicked off here at the White House over the next year or so, and I've got that under advisement. But I mean, the thing that I got out of all this is that we often think about our obligations to our young people in terms of our educational and health care and other things. I think systematizing philanthropy, service, and then letting more kids, this Michigan thing, I love this, letting more young people decide how the money they raise is given out, I think is a very, very good thing to do. So I hope we can do some things to work on all those. But as you go back home, please, if you ask the people in your state to add community service to the curriculum of the public schools. It is the right thing to do. This is not something I can or properly should do. This is within the purview of the states. But I've been out there hawking it now for a couple of years, and you could probably have more success than I've had, but it's a big deal, and it will be, it's a wonderfully popular thing in Maryland, and it could be in every other state in America. Thank you.
Now this panel will look at innovations in philanthropy and the role of technology. Our first panelist will be Kevin Fong, a general partner of the Mayfield Fund, a California-based venture capital partnership, and co-chair of Silicon Valley 2, a new fund for young professionals that promotes giving to nonprofit organizations. He will be followed by Catherine Muther, who has held senior positions in leading Silicon Valley companies and is the founder and president of the Three Guineas Fund, whose mission is to create access to opportunity for women and girls. Then we will hear from Steve Case, the chairman and CEO of America Online. The AOL Foundation works to use technology to improve the lives of families and children and has just unveiled this week its new philanthropy website. So we'll start with Kevin Fong.
Thank you for having me here. I will start by defining what founder stock is. I'm going to talk about venture philanthropy and founder stock. Mayfield Fund as a venture capital partnership on our business role is in the business of starting and creating and funding new companies and helping entrepreneurs get started in business. 3 years ago, the partners at Mayfield Fund decided that there was more to just starting companies, and we decided to get involved with the community in a much larger way. Silicon Valley has been, where we come from and where we're based, has been very good to us. It's a tremendous environment with great economic growth and creativity. And we think it's going to be compared to the days of the Renaissance, what's really happening out in the Valley. We've all benefited, I've benefited from that. And I think it's time to share, to stand for something that comes from the heart and is about giving back. I asked myself, why couldn't I use the visibility that I've gained in venture capital and the high-tech industry to bring that message to others and cause them to act with me? Mayfield has been a leader in creating over 350 companies in the last 30 years, and we can be a leader in philanthropy as well and bring other venture capital firms and startups with us at the same time. So what is venture philanthropy and what does it mean? What it means to us is taking the principles of venture capital and bringing that to the philanthropic world. And what are those principles? First, it's about taking risks and willing to fail and not being afraid to fail. Being entrepreneurial means trying things and sometimes failing. In our business, to be successful, the successes count, the failures don't, and you learn from your failures. It also means being an active investor or an active giver. It means being involved not just with your dollars, but also with your time. And that's the success behind our business in venture capital. It also means invest, measure, and invest. By measure, it means that you know what you're shooting for. When you invest, you have certain things that you are measuring things with, and that accountability is important. And with that accountability comes the ability and the desire to participate and invest again. And then finally, when it comes to fundraising, we can use the magic of stock options and founder stock for the community purposes. To that end, the managing partner of Mayfield Fund, Gib Myers, started something called the Entrepreneurs Foundation. The Entrepreneurs Foundation is focused on early stage companies that we've started in the Silicon Valley, whereby they give founder stock to the foundation. Now in the early days, the stock isn't worth very much money, and we've only started in the last 2 years. But already 53 companies are participating, and 6 of those have gone public. Thank you for the stock market. And it's generated $4 million in value already to this foundation at a very early stage. We think that will grow just from today's forecast to $8.5 million. And I think that's very significant, and that can grow to very, very much more. So the wealth that's been created by the individuals in this valley, I think, can be translated, and I think the Entrepreneurs Foundation can really point the way and show them how to participate and how stock options and founder stock can really make a difference. So at Mayfield Fund, we helped seed the Entrepreneurs Foundation the same way that we seeded and incubated many other companies, and we think this is our proudest accomplishment to date, actually. The next thing we've done is myself and a co-chair, Laura Arriaga, with the sponsorship of the Community Foundation in Silicon Valley, of which I'm on the board of directors, has started something called Silicon Valley Social Ventures, or we call it SV2 for short. And this is targeted at the young entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley who really have no idea the magnitude of wealth that they created or what that can mean for the community. I think there is a common misperception, even amongst the wealthier young entrepreneurs in our community, of how much it really takes to make a huge difference. And their traditional networks of family or church are being replaced, actually, in the Valley by the network of the Silicon Valley and by the workplace. And with SV2, we hope to reach and deliver with their peers and with leaders in their industries and set an example for how they can get involved with the community. And we think that's a very worthy effort. We've just started it. We've had 2 organizational meetings, and essentially, it's again trying to provide leadership and showing other young people how they can get involved. I think there's a normal cycle of how one gets involved in the community, which many of these, the 27-year-olds, don't experience yet. When you get married, you have children, your children go to school, you get involved in the school, and then you get involved, and that pulls you into the community. Many of these people aren't married yet, and all they know is about work. So by these networking events in SV2, we're hoping to get people involved much earlier on and letting them know both that there are worthy causes and there's a lot of pleasure and self-satisfaction in getting involved. So SV2 is all about starting venture philanthropists. So in Silicon Valley, we're really known for innovation and for trying new things. It's all about changing the world and doing things differently. That's the core of venture philanthropy. That's not saying that things that were done in the past were poor or wrong. It's just that maybe there are some new ways that with some creative energy that we can bring to the table that we can think about new ways of doing things. It's worked for Silicon Valley, it's working in many other places, and we hope other people will follow us as well. Thank you.
Kevin. Catherine, would you describe the Three Guineas Fund and then also perhaps share your thoughts excuse me, about how more people from the high-tech community can become investors in the nonprofit sector?
Sure. I wanted to begin with a story, though, first. If that would be okay with you. 2 years ago, I was sitting on a bench, a wooden bench, facing 30 other women in Bangladesh, one of the poorest countries in the world. These women were members of the Grameen Bank, and had received very small loans to begin to engage in small enterprise in commerce and trade. And they asked me to introduce myself, and I said, well, my name is Kate Muther. I work in business to support my family and send my children to school. And all 30 of them said, we too, we too. And I know Hillary Clinton had a very similar experience there, where then they showed me around the village to see the wells that they had dug, the toilets they had made, the roofs on houses, and children in schools. It was I learned through that personal experience what the Grameen Bank had discovered, and it is this, that women, when given an opportunity to participate in the economy, tend to reinvest in social value. They send their children to schools, they invest in education, they invest in health, and they invest in sanitation. And this is a principle that I have worked into my foundation, which does have a mission to create access to opportunity for women and girls, particularly in education and the economy. One of the access issues that we've been working on is women's access to capital. And we have created, with the help of our community foundation, several foundations that are here, corporate philanthropies and others, a model to begin to work at what is a systemic problem in our society. The idea is to bring together entrepreneurs who are starting up companies in information technology, and in this case, an incubator for women CEOs and founders who are developing and building new companies. We're creating a kind of learning laboratory in entrepreneurship, and we're creating a kind of learning laboratory in philanthropy. Each entrepreneur who comes into the incubator pledges 2% of the value of the company into an equity reinvestment fund. So like Mayfield's Entrepreneurs Foundation, over time, in a venture capital time frame of perhaps 3 to 10 years, we would expect that all of the companies coming into the incubator and some graduating to the community, that we would have created wealth to ensure the self-sustainability of the incubator and to provide a fund for the entrepreneurs who helped to create that wealth to come back and to participate and to practice making the philanthropic decisions about how that wealth is reinvested in the community. This is one example of some of the kinds of practices and approaches that people like myself and Kevin and Steve, who've been schooled in the new economy, bring to the philanthropic sector. Kevin told you a little bit about how he sees venture philanthropy. And I wanted to add to some of his remarks by saying that I think just as Rockefeller and Carnegie brought a set of assumptions and business practices to their work in this sector, that we bring a set of business practices and assumptions in how we think about how we solve problems and how we work. And one of these is a strategic focus on change. We embrace change. We live through technology that is transforming our society. And we think about what are models or what are the methods that one could use to bring about change in solving systemic kinds of problems. So for example, with the Women's Technology Cluster, we're working on the issue of access to capital. What's that about? How do you begin to understand what this is about? And so we approach it with a hypothesis and a theory about change, which in this particular case is that the hypothesis is that differences, especially with respect to color and gender, tend to be perceived as riskier. In an industry that he's in, which is very homogeneous and is all about risk and managing risk and getting rewarded for risk, that it can influence outcomes in terms of how investments are made. So with this incubator, we are reducing risks, we're accelerating growth, and we are facilitating women's access to capital to build companies. The second business practice is teamwork. The models of management based on command and control are fired, basically. We don't think that you get things done by ordering people around. We think that the way to solve complex problems is to get a team of people together from diverse points of view and with a whole set of skills. So for example, the way new product is developed is you put the engineers and the marketing people and the technicians and the technical support people and the documentation writers and the trainers and sales all together on a team, and you give them resources and you solve the problem. And I think that this approach to thinking about complex problems, social problems, is one that could be adopted in this sector with some potential to really working at some of these problems. The third business practice is we have a propensity to partner. It's a way of getting things done. It's part of how business is conducted. And if you think, for example, about, if I could use you as an example, Steve, that he may think of himself as a tycoon. I don't think of him as a tycoon. I think of him as a sort of new millennium community organizer. This guy, he's got 10 million customers, he's got thousands of partners. He built that company because he and his company understand what it means to partner and to what a difference that could make. Along with these business practices, the strategic focus on change, tackling complex problems with teams, and partnering, comes a set of attitudes. And I figure that Carnegie and Rockefeller had their baggage too. And in fact, when people ask me, what is venture philanthropy? I think, well, it's philanthropy with attitude. So we have some attitudes. One of those is a sense of urgency. And sometimes this looks like impatience. We are confident. Sometimes this looks like arrogance. In fact, sometimes it is arrogance. And we have a sense of accountability and results. And sometimes this looks like control. But together, I think, this set of business practices and the attitudes that come along with it are part of what we really bring to you. That they're part of our human capital. We have the founder stock and we have the comfort with technology. But I think that it's this human capital that we bring here that provides a kind of convergence from the traditions that we were talking about in the first panel and how philanthropy is moving into the new economy. In fact, I think that philanthropy is the soul of the new economy. And I think that as Steve talks about the role of technology and how it is transforming industries, it has the potential to have transformative effect in the independent sector as well.
Thank you very much, ladies. Bangladesh, I remember very well sitting on that same bench, and among the conversations that we had is whether or not in my house we lived with our animals. And I said, from time to time, all different kinds of animals. Well, Steve, you've already been referred to several times, and I know that you've just unveiled this new website, but you've also got a lot of other ideas about how to increase giving and use these opportunities that I'd like you to share with us.
First of all, I'd like to be clear, I do not consider myself a tycoon either, so let's move along. It's interesting, I'll talk about the internet, but I think it's worth going back to where we started with the video, which is striking to me in several respects. The first was, I never realized that this was the first White House conference on philanthropy. And the fact that we've been around for 200 years and we haven't had one, I think, is stunning. And I really congratulate you for shining a spotlight on this issue. And the second part of the video, which was striking, a little humbling, were some of the stories. Having a 11-year-old child spending time collecting, I think it was 2 million pennies, or a 78-year-old forklift operator who kept working so he had the capability of continuing to give. It really does kind of hit you that if they're making these kind of sacrifices, maybe we all could be doing even more. So I think the first step here is simply shining a spotlight on the issue and educating people. And some of these, I think, little stories really bring it to life, and seeing those little stories in TV public service ads or on the internet, or having you, as you just did, congratulate the Bill and Melinda Gates for making some major contributions, really building a culture of service, a culture of philanthropy is the first thing, because the internet really is not creating new needs as much as a better way to allow you to communicate, a better way to allow you to shop, a better way maybe to allow you to invest. So it's really taking things that people have decided are important and making them a little more convenient. And I think there is a growing thirst in this country and around the world for people who want to give back. There is a growing capability because of so many successes. So what we're trying to do is, just as we've tried to make communications easier through email or retailing easier through e-commerce, we're trying to make philanthropy easier through e-philanthropy. And it's really about creating essentially a portal. Just as you can go to a portal to get to content or go to a portal to get to commerce, why not go to a portal to find out about organizations that need your help? There's 620,000 organizations that are now listed in this helping.org site, and you can go directly to it and find out in your state or based on your particular interest, maybe it's in youth development, which organizations need your help if you want to volunteer time or could use your money, and make it easy for you to kind of make one-click donations. So it doesn't stimulate that desire. That has to happen in your family or in your church or through a spotlight in the culture on the importance of giving back. But it does make the process of giving back a lot easier. And we've seen this with email. Now AOL alone delivers more email each day than the US Postal Service. The reason is it's so easy to type a message and send it. People are now more in touch with their family and relatives and business associates than they were before. It just made it easier. We want to make philanthropy easier. And it's not just an AOL initiative. We're working with American Red Cross and GuideStar and Volunteer Match. A lot of people have really come together to build the helping.org site, to build this portal for philanthropy, with the idea that we can take all these tens of millions of people who are starting to change their lives because of the internet and help them change society because of the internet as well.
Well, it's a very exciting development, obviously, that we're all going to be hoping will do exactly what Steve said, which is to provide a better means for that spirit of giving that we hope to spark in all of us. There was a roundtable also about e-philanthropy earlier today, sponsored by the National Charities Information Bureau, Greater Good, Charitable Way, the AOL Foundation, and the Commerce Department. And a group of nonprofit organizations and companies came together to discuss the pitfalls and potential of giving through the internet. And I'd like to ask one of the participants to speak briefly about what happened and perhaps some of the plans that might have come out of it. Bill Massey is the president of the National Charities Information Bureau. And Mr. Massey?
Thank you, Mrs. Clinton and fellow guests. Earlier today, across the street from the White House at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce building, National Charities Information Bureau hosted a public forum on e-philanthropy, technology, and the nonprofit community. The forum, as Mrs. Clinton described, brought together business leaders, government leaders, foundation and nonprofit executives to begin a conversation about opportunities for community-based as well as national and regional nonprofits to benefit from the existing and emerging internet technologies. We are, relatively speaking, at the dawn of new ways of supporting charities and nonprofits. And National Charities Information Bureau, which for 82 years has promoted informed giving and accountable nonprofit management, is impressed by the commitment of industry leaders to affirm voluntarily fundamental practices that will safeguard and ensure the interest of both donors and nonprofit organizations. Accordingly, this morning, the three sponsors of the forum, the AOL Foundation, Charitable Way, and GreaterGood.com, affirmed 4 tips for nonprofit net transactions. The tips include security and privacy of information, informed choice that is free of hidden detail, full disclosure, including tax deductibility and exactly how charities benefit, and ease in getting answers online to questions or issues. Furthermore, today we have resolved with the White House to host additional forums and meetings to extend and expand the dialogue begun here, to encourage best practices in the areas of e-philanthropy, and to nurture the capacity of community-based as well as national organizations to benefit from the exceptional possibilities of internet philanthropy. We thank you for bringing together this distinguished group of committed and visionary leaders and for your own commitment to the promise of America's future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. Well, our final participant in this segment of our program will be Professor Rosabeth Moss-Kanter, professor at the Harvard Business School, who is an expert on corporate community involvement. And I would like to ask Professor Kanter how employers can stimulate more individual giving and what some of the best practices you've seen might be.
We have heard a set of very exciting stories and role models here today, and I'm glad that we're talking about the role of employers, because to some extent, the chance to do community service while employed by a company may be one of the hottest new employee benefits today. Well, maybe not as hot as stock options, but service options are also considered extremely important, even in startup companies. There's a little startup software company in Cambridge called Buzz Technologies. Few people, they adopted a school because it was a way that they could not only enhance their knowledge of software development by working with kids in the school and having to teach it, but it was a way to create a corporate culture that expressed their values. And employees today are too busy often to organize volunteer activities for themselves. They are grateful when the employer helps them do that. And there are many innovative new models on the horizon from which we all can learn. Some employers are starting to turn their employees into grant makers, a little bit like what we were learning about the yaks, although these are adults. Bank Boston, for example, through its diversity resource groups, organized groups of employees who were identified with a particular aspect of diversity, whether it was working parents, disabled employees, ethnic minorities, gays and lesbians, and gave them $25,000 that they could give in grants to organizations of their choice, which then stimulated those employees to give even more out of their personal funds and to begin to volunteer for the organizations that they were associated with. Employers are also increasingly offering community service opportunities for their employees and providing the release time to do it, which has enormous community impact. Whether it's Timberland's 5 days a year for community service, many of which are organized in partnership with City Year, a nonprofit organization, youth service organization serving the communities, or Bank of America, which allows its employees 2 hours a week if they are volunteering in the schools of release time. That's big and that's powerful. Or Home Depot, that works with Kaboom to organize Home Depot employees and bring supplies in order to build playgrounds that have an immediate visible impact on the community. What employers are doing is not just stimulating activity, they're increasingly organizing it so it creates the kind of change we've been hearing today is so important. And when they do it with a strategic focus, it is often incredibly powerful. IBM's Reinventing Education is a path-breaking way to take IBM technology and talent, coupled with IBM employee volunteers and giving to attempt to transform many of the ways public education occurs in America. And some of the statistics are amazing. IBM, through its employees as well as its own foundation, has contributed nearly $250 million in cash, equipment, and employee time. Now, 60% is from the company, but 40% is from employees that are stimulated by the values of the company and the encouragement of the company and the leadership of CEO Lou Gerstner. There are 1-to-1 matching grants, but 5-to-1 matching grants when they involve K through 12 education, which is IBM's major focus. About 4.5 million hours of employee service, a quarter of it to K through 12 education was contributed last year. And when employees volunteer more than 100 hours a year for a particular organization, IBM will chip in a $1,500 grant to that organization. These are powerful incentives for employees to get involved, and employees love it, so of course it benefits the company. In building a strong corporate culture, in training leaders of the future, in building teams of diverse people across the company who would never work together if it weren't for community service. So it's not only corporate citizenship and citizenship, it's community involvement as a tool to build businesses. And when these are in partnership with nonprofit organizations like Timberland with City Year, or Home Depot with Kaboom, or IBM with the numerous school districts in the public sector with whom it partners, this is a new kind of partnership that's impact and results oriented, that has the potential to reinvent American institutions and revitalize communities, and convert philanthropy from an afterthought, spare change, what's left over after you do your real work, to a force for transforming the way we do things in America, to real change that makes a real difference.
Thank you, Rosabeth. Well, the president is going to have to leave us before we get into further discussion, but I wanted to be sure that he had a chance for the final word of this segment of the conference.
Well, I'll be quite brief. I want to say, first of all of these participants have given something special to us to think about for the future. I think what Rosabeth said is very important. If we can somehow institutionalize for companies of all sizes the idea that this is an important part of their mission, and that they can leverage their own employees' gifts by matching them in money or giving them sustained, organized time. I think that's a big deal. And that we need to, one of the things that I think ought to come out of this conference is our determination here at the White House to do whatever we can to replicate that and accelerate that process. I think what Steve has done in giving interested people access to the world of giving in an intelligent way is also very important. That's one of the things I said in the beginning. We want to not only increase the volume, but make sure people know what they're doing better. I think what Kevin said is really wonderful. I mean, all this, he explained to you what I tried to make fun of and joke about because I don't have any of that founder stock stuff. But, Silicon Valley and the whole venture capital high-tech community needs to be at the forefront of what we're doing for the same reason that Willie Sutton robbed banks. That's where the money is. And I think, I'm very...
How you're going to get out of that one.
That's where the money is. That's what he said.
Okay.
And I have been very impressed by the number of people that I personally know, because obviously there's so many issues that we have to deal with that involve the high-tech community. And I've been amazed at the accelerating rate with which people with whom I come in contact bring these kinds of philanthropic issues up now and are looking for ways to leverage the skills and the techniques and the attitudes that Kevin and Catherine talked about. This last point I want to make is this. Hillary and I discovered the Grameen Bank. You talked about the Grameen Bank probably 15, 16 years ago now. And we opened a branch of the South Shore Development Bank, a bank like that, a development bank in Arkansas, when I was governor. Now AID in our administration funds 2 million loans a year to poor village women. And we also, we just got another appropriation to fund our microcredit program here in the United States in poor neighborhoods. And apparently late last night, our battle to support financial modernization, which will increase the size and sweep of our financial institutions, but preserve their obligations to make reinvestments in the community. Now, against that background, I just would like to say that given all that both of you have said, I think that the people who are in the high-tech community are particularly well qualified to focus on individual economic empowerment to people and places that have been left behind in this astonishing economic recovery. If this thing keeps going until February, we will have the longest expansion in the history of America, and there won't be a war involved. We already have the longest peacetime expansion. And yet we all know there are people and places that aren't a part of it. Of all the philanthropic things that the high-tech community can do, the obvious best candidates to me are education for the obvious reasons in the relation to technology. But the other thing is we are struggling to find ways to bring enterprise and opportunity to hardworking, decent people who live in places that have been totally passed by this marvelous recovery that normally I just stand up and reel off the good statistics. But every night I go to bed and I think about how in God's name could we have the biggest economic boom in the history of the country and have so many places that had passed over just like a storm in the night. And I do believe that for all the reasons you said in your remarkable presentation and the things that you said about what's in the heart as well as the mind of the people there, and the incredible power of the technology that Steve talked about, if you could focus on what a philanthropic strategy designed to maximize this moment to deal with the poor who are willing to work and have been left behind, you could make a profound, permanent contribution to the well-being of American society. You're great. You are great. I want to get a copy of what you said. It's wonderful. You are so great. What are you going to do?